Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Howdy Partner. My name is Simon Panek. I will be today's host, and I'm a partner solutions architect here on the partner team. And a little bit about this show, if you haven't seen it before, Howdy Partner is our weekly Twitch show where we invite on an interesting guest, a validated AWS partner, to share with us a little bit about their story, how they came to be, what their solution is, and what they can offer the market. But I'm not going to be working by myself today. Along with me, I will have Rachel Pothen. I'm going to invite onto the screen.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Simon. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Howdy Partner episode. My name is Rachel Pothen, and I'm also Partner Solutions Architect, just like Simon here at AWS. And today we have a really cool AWS partner with us today, that is Workato. So, Workato is a super cool AWS partner who has been doing some great stuff in the field of workflow automations as well as integrations. And today from Workato, we have Ryan and Carly with us. Ryan and Carly, would you like to introduce yourselves and kick us off?
Sounds good. I can do it. Hi there. My name is Ryan. I currently manage the partner success team here at Workato. Been with Workato for 8 years now. Fun fact, I have done almost every role here in Workato. I can't sell. I give too much discounts. Not good enough to be in the engineering team, but I landed myself very well in the customer success organization. So that's a bit about myself.
Excellent. Glad to have you here. And howdy, partner. Carly, looks like we might be having some technical difficulties, but see if we can bring her back on.
Can you guys hear me? See
There
me
we
okay?
go. Welcome.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Howdy. Carly Frederik. I am the director of our solution consultants practice for our embedded platform. So we've got two cool offerings of our product that we'll get into today, one of them being an embedded offering. So I lead our solutions team. Been at Workato for over 4 years now. I'm living in the Denver area. Fun fact, nothing as cool as Ryan's, but we're expecting our first baby girl in January. So that's a fun fact on the personal side. But it's a pleasure to be here, and we're excited. Thank you.
Well, I'm personally very excited about this episode for a couple of reasons. One, in my previous role before joining AWS, I used Workato and their platform on a nearly daily basis. So although I'm very familiar with their product, it's been more than a year. So I know that their product has grown and they've offered a number of new features I'm interested to check out. Also, it's interesting because Workato is built on the AWS platform. So I'm interested to hear what's worked well for you in the past, where you're going in the future, and yeah, topics like that. Ryan, before we get started into Workato and its offerings, do you mind talking about origin story a little bit? Were you around early enough to kind of give us an idea of what Workato was like in the early days? I know that a lot of our viewers are interested in startups or themselves are working for them or involved with them.
Yeah, I definitely can talk about it. So when I joined Workato, by the way, officially my employee ID is 21, but unofficially I like to say I'm employee 11 because one, the number is cool. Two, back then in the old office, it's a very small office. I still remember vividly there were 11 of us, including myself. So the least technical person of the lot would usually be like the office manager, would run errands for the team, and that happens to be me. So I used to order a lot of lunches for our team to ensure that, hey, they can remain productive. But in the early days, one thing I will call out is one thing that drew me to Workato and why I'm still here today after 8 years is because at the end of the day, we're not coding for the sake of coding. When we first started out Workato, we were solving a real world problem, a very practical challenge that many people, in fact, many of the viewers might already face with integration tools. In the past, it's very siloed towards very technical folks. So you need to be either a coder, a hardcore developer who understands like the nuances of infrastructure, memory. You need to know APIs, of course. But we want to be able to democratize this to the people who we are actually automating the processes for, which are the business, right? So that's where we kind of, and that's how we founded Workato, because we wanted to be able to give the power of integrations to the people who really need it, who would benefit from the outcomes of these integrations, which is the business, while providing governance to IT to be able to provide control across the organization. So the interesting fact is today in our demo, what we'll be going through is Oh, I heard some guess. Is that me or?
Not sure.
Oh, okay. Uh, I guess one thing to call out is today what we'll be showing in the demo is a core offering of Workato in both the direct and embedded space. We call it recipes, which are synonymous to workflows. This core offering that we have as recipes have not changed through the father of time. So 8 years ago, we call it recipes. Till today, that concept have not changed. And the whole idea around Workato, where we want to democratize integrations for the users, that concept has not changed. So it's really that the basis of how we were founded, and it continues with us till today. So that's a bit about Workato. I don't know, Simon, if that addresses some of the things that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear what the initial idea was and how you were involved. And it makes a lot of sense. And from a user perspective, I can say that, yeah, someone who had recently transitioned to technology and software development, stepping into Workato was an easy initial role because, it was a low-code solution. So if I had an understanding generally of how the code should work, then it was easy to step in and use Workato's tooling. How about you, Carly? What brought you to Workato?
So when I joined about a little over 4 years ago, I think obviously the foundation of the company had grown a bit since Ryan's early days, but our founding team has remained the same. They all come from the integration and automation space. And I think they knew really well what the challenges that we were trying to solve for were. And we talk about democratizing integrations, making them available to more builders. When I had joined, there was an opportunity that opened up to offer that same type of product to product and engineering teams. So traditionally speaking, we were founded to really sell into different lines of business, IT, finance, marketing, HR, to kind of go and solve in what we call internal or back office integrations through our product. The embedded platform is actually the same product core built on AWS that is now kind of externalized through different software applications for consumption to our partners and customers. So folks will take our product, white label it, embed it into their products, and then offer it to their customers to offer productized integration. So I joined to help start that business for us as a true revenue stream. And it's been such an exciting journey, I think, from day zero when we didn't really know what it was to today having over 300 customers that live in that space. So to me, it was, I was brought in, kind of really bought into the vision of integrations and automations and how Workato was solving for them, and using the embedded platform to really power more and more people to that offering. So it's been a pretty crazy ride for 4 years to establish that, but really exciting nonetheless.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess another early question for you before we get into the demonstrations, which I know we're all excited about, but as an AWS partner, what's your experience been? Like, at what point did AWS become the platform you were going to work with, and has it been a good relationship? What's your experience been?
I think personally, for us, AWS has always been around since the early days. We are probably a very big AWS customer. We use many of the tools, right? Your compute, memory, storage, all runs on AWS. Now we have different data centers all over the world running with AWS. So we have been a big proponent of AWS from the very beginning. And then throughout the course of the different years, we have many customers who wanted to integrate with different AWS products, right? S3, your relationship databases. So we have those as part of what we call connectors in Workato. So now we are seeing a lot more customers who are building workflows with these different connectors.
Okay, that's excellent. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that it's working for you for one, and that it's grown with you as you've scaled. So that's great.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, because I sit more on the sales side of the house, just in terms of speaking about the value proposition of our platform. And I think just being able to say that we're hosted on AWS in and of itself is a pretty big credibility booster. So it's always been just best in class, it feels like, when we have those conversations, especially because we sell to more technical folks at the end of the day. And we, anyone who's out there who might be selling software right now knows that you can get put through the ringer a bit when it comes to an RFP or getting kind of security assessments done. And so That has always been obviously just a really easy win for us to have this partnership in place. And then to Ryan's point, to not undermine the fact that we can also connect to AWS services on top of Workato through our connectors. I mean, almost any single proof of concept that we're running is typically talking to like an S3 bucket or something like that, or we're working with AWS Lambdas or something that really is kind of part of your suite. Feels like it's second nature to us to know those systems as well. So it's just been a lot of good synergy.
Yeah, excellent. Well, in that case, maybe while Ryan prepares, I believe you want to do the initial demonstration. Just want to welcome our viewers again and let you know that we're hoping this is an interactive session. If you have any comments, go ahead and throw them out, and we'll help to bring them on screen and answer questions for you from our experts. But yeah, we want to invite you to be part of this conversation as well.
Awesome. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I guess howdy partners. I wanted to call out something that Rachel, you touched on earlier. I know we call ourselves a workflow automation platform, but really we are truly an enterprise automation platform. Two things to kind of debunk there. Enterprise is because we provide a lot of the capabilities that enterprise would need when it comes to security, governance, collaboration. And I know the word automation may throw a couple of folks off, but really, as our CEO puts it, integration and automation, this whole landscape is converging. It's kind of like two sides to the same coin. And how we see it, we will talk about it more in a couple of slides down the road. But that's how we see ourselves play out in the enterprise automation space. Going back to the whole story of how, I guess, Workato originated, many of our founders, they came from the enterprise space, and they have a very long history of integration knowledge. For those who are not familiar, TIBCO was one of the, I guess, early founding members of the whole integration space, where they provided integrations for many of the Fortune 500 companies. So our founders, they understand this space very, very well enough, and they understand the challenges of this space. So I talked a bit during my introduction earlier about the challenges with integrations of the past. A lot of it is around, it's siloed to people who are very technical. And because of these challenges, you get all these problems, right? Where it's very slow. IT gets a lot of backlog when it comes to integration use cases for the business. And then as a result, it may become more of a shadow IT, where other departments, say, wants to get some of these core critical integrations out, but they can't. And that's why our founding team understand that there is still a challenge, integrations of the past, and the way to solve it is to be able to democratize integrations to the people who really needs it, which are the business, while providing an interface for IT to govern, right, some of these integration workflows. So that's the problem that we are addressing. And really, we were not coding for the sake of coding. I think how we got to today is because we were solving the needs of our customers, and that's really important. So I kind of saw that the entire growth. One thing to call out here is these are different platform categories when it comes to integrations and automations. It's a very niche, but a very saturated space. So you have RPAs, you have your APIMs, you have your data tools, BPM tools. But where we see Workato playing is creating that unified experience, unified platform to be able to combine some of the business outcomes from these different platform categories into a central tool, which is Workato. So it provides the power of the enterprise, but we talk about security governance, but also to be able to democratize integration. So in the demo that you'll see later, how simple the interface is really talks to the power, right? So that's Workato in a nutshell when it comes to enterprise automation. Using this slide to narrate further what is enterprise automation all about is, as I mentioned, creating that unified experience. So if I point the users to the right-hand side from the bottom right, these are different types of integration use cases that we typically come across. So for most people, when they talk about integration, it's about connecting systems, connecting applications, connecting data. But where we also see integrations evolving is we want to incorporate humans into the loop. So that's where automation comes in, right? We talk about workflows. How do we incorporate humans, decision-making points, so that we can act on some of these workflows? And then document processing as well. Those are things that we could potentially do in Workato. So there is integrations and automations. And then comes experience, because as you integrate humans into the loop, the experience of them interfacing with something becomes really important. So use cases like creating of bots, creating of forms through Workato apps, giving users that experience to be able to interface with their data. That's something that we also do. And then finally, at the top, when it comes to insights, after you integrate your data, you integrate your process and your experiences, your humans, data becomes really important. And that's where insights becomes critical, because you want to be able to quantify the ROI of some of these processes that you're automating. So that's something that's on the roadmap. But the whole premise around showing this slide is we want to be able to create a platform that is a single experience, so that users do not need to go out of the platform to do something as it relates to integrations or automations. And then the last thing that I will end off here is one experience I would emphasize on that. When it comes to different types of use cases, integration tools of the past, you might need to learn different skill sets. You might need to learn different tools to be able to work on some of these automation or integration use cases. But with Workato, because we are creating a single unified experience, it doesn't matter if you are integrating humans in the loop, or you're integrating data, or you're connecting applications. It's only one skill set that you have to learn, which is what we call the recipe language, which we'll be showing in the demo later. But it's really that one skill set. And if you're a master of recipes, you could potentially do any of these use cases in Workato. So that's really kind of the USP of Workato. And then this is what you'll be seeing in the demo very shortly. What makes us uniquely different is really how we are addressing the integration problem that I talked about earlier. And these are the 5 key points that we'll be showing as part of the demo. The last thing I would leave the folks with is Workato, we have different channels. So Kali talked about, we have the direct offering, where we have customers who comes to us directly, where they want to automate their internal processes tied to different functional groups. So you have marketing, you have your IT use cases, IT provisioning, finance, quote to cash. So that's one channel, the direct channel. And then Carly represents the embedded channel, where we have tech companies, SaaS companies, who comes to us, who wants to extend their integration abilities to their end customers. And then finally, we have different partner channels to further distribute the product. We have our GSI and SI partners, our system integrators. We also have ISV partners, where we sell through some of these tech companies, SaaS companies, to their customers. And then finally, BPO stands for business process outsourcing, where some of these partners, they have specific process that they would customers would outsource these business process to the BPO partners. So these are some of the channels that we have. Kali, I don't know if there's anything else to touch on embedded.
Nope. Stay tuned for the latter half, I'd say, of our demo. We'll get into actually visualizing embedded for you as well.
Okay, sounds good. Then with that, I guess I would jump straight into the demo, because that's usually where the cool stuff is. Unless Simon, Rachel, if there's anything else to add.
Yeah, just before you jump in there, I'm wondering if anybody in our audience right now is involved with any sort of automation or integration. I know that when I was using Workato, I was primarily doing integration work between our CRM and our learning management platform, as well as our business applications. And that was my particular use case, but I'm wondering if anybody else in the audience is doing any other automation that they'd be willing to share us and let us discuss. But with that, I'll go ahead and bring those up if they come in. And Ryan, you can go ahead and kick us off.
Sounds good. Before I jump into the product, when people think about integrations, the first thing that usually comes to mind is being able to connect applications. So this is a really good resource for anyone who wants to see what are some of the connectors that Workato has out of the box. Workato.com/integrations is a very good resource. Today, we support over 2,000 different connectors out of the box, meaning if you want to integrate, say, Salesforce to your S3 buckets, and you find the connectors here in our library, you can immediately build workflows in Workato using these connectors. What I'll do is I'll point you into a connector so you guys get visibility into what a connector looks like. So with any connectors, Workato, we have pre-built, I'll call recipes. Recipes for us is synonymous to workflows. So we have pre-built recipes. So think of this as templates that you could use out of the box. So you do not need to start from scratch. You can actually learn from best practices that our customers, partners has to share. So you could potentially click into the recipe, and if this matches what you're trying to do, potentially, you could immediately install this, and then you could configure this and use this out of the box. So those are pre-built templates. And this is something that Workato has patents over, so it's unique to Workato. As you start to scroll down, you would have customer stories, but more importantly, if I draw your attention to this, every single connector that exists in Workato today have what we call triggers as well as actions. Triggers really define the starting point of a recipe, and it's event-based. So whenever something happens, for example, when an opportunity closes, or when a case is opened by a customer support agent, trigger that workflow to kick off. So that's what a trigger is. And then we have actions, which is essentially the work that you want the recipe or automation to do. So these are all downstream. You can send information to your downstream systems, to any systems that we connect to out of the box. And then you'll start to notice that there are some labels that we have: real-time, batch, bulk. This represents different types of use cases that we can perform, whether it's transactional, or if you want to do what we call ETL, extract, transform, load, where you want to do bulk data sync. You could use these different operations. So again, just to familiarize yourself with the concept of a connector, triggers, and actions, this is what you'll see in a recipe shortly. If I move back one, and just because we are a proud AWS partner, I got to show the different Amazon products that we connect to. So if you type Amazon or AWS, you will see the different connectors. And these are also pretty common connectors that our customers use today, whether they want to connect to their file systems, S3, whether they want to connect to their relationship databases. We have Redshift, Postgres. So those are pretty common use cases that we come across here at Workato too. But with that, I guess, Rachel, Simon, is there anything that you want me to call out here? If not, I could jump into the actual demo.
I'm saying let's jump into the demo unless you have questions, Rachel.
No, I don't. Let's jump in. We've waited long enough.
That's good. I know. Okay, so here, what you see is Workato. One thing to call out is there is no software, no hardware to install. We are hosted in AWS. What you see is really what you get. So customers, when they log in, this is a representation of how a typical customer would use Workato. And I'm going to simulate this using Acme. So I'm representing Acme IT team, and these are all the different departments, right, tied to the Acme Corporation. And from a governance perspective, this is how I can understand, hey, what are some of the departments doing when it comes to automation? I can drill down into each of these teams to see what are the processes that they're automating. And anything that's controlled, whether it's, we call it recipes, usage, which is the consumption, this can be controlled by the HQ, right, which is Acme's IT team. And then we talk about collaboration. We have our workspaces. So if I want to create more workspaces, I want to stand up more workspaces for different departments, I could also do it in this centralized view. So without further ado, I think what I'll do is I'll expand the page. Rachel, you still see the screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'll do now is I'm going to simulate myself in the customer support team. So for today's demo, I'll be creating a process that's tied to a customer support use case. So what I will do here is I will switch over to the customer support view, where I'm going to be building recipes as a customer support agent. So this is how I would switch into a different workspace. Just to help orientate the users to the Workato screens, on the left-hand side, these are all projects where you would be able to organize all your assets, right? All your recipes, all your connections to applications. All of these would reside in the projects. And one thing to call out is we are all about collaboration, but we also care about security and governance. So all of these projects, we have fine-grained user controls. So only people that should have access to, for example, case management will be granted access to the case management project. And if I want to add more users into the customer support group, but only giving them access to one of these projects, that could also be done. So without further ado, I'll just get into the actual building of a recipe so you get to see the experience. So what I'll be doing is I'll be creating a use case, syncing cases from Salesforce into Jira, where Jira is that source of truth for triaging any of the issues by your support agents. So over here, we have connections that are already stood up. So before you create any recipes, you want to make sure that all the connections to the different applications that you're connecting to has already been connected. And because I've already done this ahead of time, and it's really easy to do this, you probably could do this in a couple of minutes to stand up those connections. So once these connections are stood up, you can start to really create the recipes. So what I'll do is I'll create a folder where I will host all my assets. So I'll just say AWS Howdy Partner.
Quick question about the connectors, Ryan. From what I remember is that there's a number of pre-built connectors, which makes it really easy for the users. And then you have some community connectors where you can go out and see ones other people have developed.
That's
And
right.
then you can also create your own custom connectors. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So Carly can definitely talk about the custom connectors, but we have your out-of-the-box connectors, and we also have what we call universal connectors. So any application typically would have APIs that would allow us to access their data from. So our universal connectors, our SDK framework, allows you to build an interface to be able to connect to these applications.
Yep. And I'll be covering the extensibility of that framework in a little bit, using a tool that we call the Connector SDK, which is your own tool to go build additional connectors, which our team uses internally as well. So coming soon.
Yeah. Awesome. So what I'll do is I'll create a recipe. What this does, it brings you into a recipe wizard. So now think about it from a customer perspective. We talked about the ease of use, being able to democratize integration. So when I'm building this, kind of relate to it as a customer too. So here I'll be creating a Salesforce to Jira case sync. These are all the different types of trigger points. So listening events that you could initiate a recipe from. So what I'll be doing is I'll be triggering from the application. But just to call it out, you could also run it on a schedule. You could build recipes to manage recipes. You could build functions, reusable functions, because you might have different departments that might be leveraging on that same function, like a Lambda. So that's what you can do. API platform to extend it to systems that may need APIs, especially with e-commerce. They may need that. And then you could also do bot commands. So what I'll do is I'll hit start building. On the left side, this is a blank canvas, which describes the recipe flow. On the right-hand side, these are all the configurations to the different applications that I'm connecting to. And because I've already connected to my systems here, it's going to display all the systems that I have access to. So here, I'm going to click Salesforce. And then what you'll start to see is these are all the triggers, right? So earlier when we talk about connectors, we talk about triggers and actions. These triggers starts to float up. And because AI is now such a big thing, we'll call out here that there is machine learning built into Workato to help users understand what are some of the common integration patterns or common integration processes that customers are doing today. And it's going to float some of these up. So it helps with building of the workflows much easier. So for me, because I'm creating a case from Salesforce to Jira, I'm going to start with new updated record case. And here it's going to display the connections that's accessible to me. I've already made the connection here. What you see in this screen, the configuration screen, is obviously the object that I'm connecting to. But if I open this pick list up, you would also see the different standard as well as custom objects. And for those who are knowledgeable in the Salesforce world, Salesforce, there's millions, potentially millions of objects. So as long as that user that it's connected on Workato, in that Salesforce connection has access to this, Workato is going to display it here. For customers who are very privy to their data, you could also select, hey, what are some of these fields that I only want Workato to select from? So especially with sensitive data, you may not want to select everything. You only want to select things that might be relevant to the process that you're trying to automate. So by default, if I don't select anything, it's going to retrieve everything. Over here, we call this the time machine. So if you are intending to do, say, migration of data where you need to go back in time in a very specific time and date, you could also do that. So this gives you the ability to configure the timing where Workato starts to bring that data back from. And it can be very customized. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to hit recipe start. The cool thing about Workato is at the end of the day, we cater to both non-technical as well as technical users. So at this stage, you guys probably see that I have not interacted with code. But for Salesforce Power users, they may want to get more advanced. So this is where there is advanced configurations where the more technically savvy people, the Salesforce admins of the world, they love their SOCO where clauses. They could use that, right, to be able to extract finer grain details into the workflow. So that's also available. So once you have configured the trigger, then comes to the actions, which is essentially the work that you want this automation to do. So as described earlier, we're going to send that information into Jira. But before I do that, just wanted to call out the different actions that's available. So you can work with applications. We have different logical operators as you start to build out the conditional logic to be able to catch for some of these different scenarios. You could build that in. And then most importantly is how do I manage my errors whenever something happens? For instance, there might be a data issue. How can I catch for those errors? So you could build those error handling mechanisms in the workflow itself. So once I select action in an app, same thing on the right-hand side, the configuration pops up. I'm going to hit Jira. So this is where machine learning becomes really handy because it's going to understand, hey, based on the object that I have selected in that application, what is some of the common objects downstream for Jira that users typically connect to? So it's going to float some of these operations up. So here it understands that I want to create an issue in Jira. So it's going to float that up. And you can see the color coding, which denominates how relevant this is. So I'm going to hit create. Go ahead.
Have you always been using machine learning to kind of prioritize these, or is this a relatively new addition?
We actually, if I'm not wrong, I think since 2017, 2018 timeframe,
Okay.
when we start to get a lot of data points, that's when we can use machine learning to kind of surface some of these data points.
Nice.
Yeah, we have the ability to essentially share recipes as well into a community. Think of it as like an open source GitHub repo or something like that. And we've been since 2017, Ryan, it's classified as recipe IQ. So essentially kind of scraping those things, surfacing them up as as Ryan gets into this next step, it might even start to suggest some mappings for you.
Yes.
So we've always been in that space, and then we've done even more AI work, I'd say, in the last 6 months, obviously, with the big boom of like ChatGPT and things of that nature. But yeah, it has been in the product for a while.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess moving along, same thing for triggers and actions. You would connect to the application. So for those who are familiar with Jira, when you start to build out issues within the system, they usually classify their issue type. So what you see are fields represented in the application itself. So anyone who understands the applications, like Jira, for instance, this would be very simple to understand. So issues, I'm just going to select task. And as Kali mentioned, this is where recipe IQ kicks in. It's going to understand, hey, based on the fields that I'm trying to map from Salesforce, which is my source system, into Jira, it's going to provide recommendations. But for the purposes of the demo, I'm just going to ignore. So I'll show you what it means to map data from source to downstream. So a couple of ways you can map data is obviously you want to click on the field that you're trying to map data into. Immediately, you would see this pop-up box in the center coming up. So this is what we call the data tree, which represents the whole schema of that specific case object. And it's going to represent all the different fields that I can map. Alternatively, you could use what's suggested here by Recipe IQ. So you can click, and it's going to map the data from Salesforce into Jira. So with a simple click, I'm already mapping the subject in Salesforce into the Jira summary. Same thing, if I go into description, I could use the hint provided here with Recipe IQ, or I could use the search bar to hit description, and then I'll do a drag and drop. So over here, one thing I will start to call out is you would notice with any field that I'm trying to map, Workato tells you a couple of things. Workato tells you the field type. So you know when you're mapping from the source system to your downstream system, whether it's an apples to apples match, right? You probably don't want to map a text field into a date field. That's when you would need to do some level of data transformation. The second thing that Workato does is we provide a sample set of data so that users who build these recipes need not go into the application or try to understand the application. You would understand, hey, what are typical values tied to each of these fields. So it really helps with the recipe building experience. And then the last field that I'll map is issue priority. So typically you could do a pick list, but I don't want to hard code. I want to make sure it's dynamic. So instead of selecting from list, I can change. I toggle it. I'll use priority name. Same thing, I could use Recipe IQ to map over from Salesforce to Jira. So in a couple of minutes, we already have a recipe that's built out. So what I'll do here is I'll just quickly test the recipe. And earlier in the time machine, I said whenever recipe starts. So now what I would have to do is I'll go into Salesforce. Everyone loves Salesforce. So I'll come in here. I'll create a new case. So we get to see this happening real time. I already had an account, Piper, case origin, email. So priority, I'll put it as medium. And maybe I'll say, hey, website went down. You have angry customers. So earlier, I mapped 3 different fields, right? We mapped subject, we mapped the description, and we mapped the priority. So you would see those floating over to Jira. So the moment I hit save, what I would have to do is I'll go back to the recipe. Most recipes, if it's not real time, it's usually event-based, and it's a poll, right? So Workato asks Salesforce, hey, are there new and updated records? So I can force that because I want to show what's happening. So in this case, it has already picked up that case that I've created. And what you see is here, you can see all the metadata associated to the case that I've just created. So you would see the description, you would see the subject. So we talked about website going down and priority medium. And then same thing when we are creating that issue in Jira. Here you would see the input as well as the output. And if I hover into Jira, I refresh it. Okay, I don't even need to refresh. It's real time. So that case got moved from Salesforce to Jira. So in the simple 5 minutes of this demo, you already saw a simple recipe being built out. Here's the job report. So if I ever want to debug, right, what happened in the specific record, you could use the jobs for it. So with that, just like any, I guess with recipes, it's a cooking show. I did have a fully flushed out recipe that we have built before this. And it takes about 15 minutes to really build something like this out, where when you think about business process, obviously there is logic where you need to handle for duplicates. Obviously there is more information that you want to sync across, things like comments, attachments. So this is a recipe that does that, where it handles for any updates to the issue. So if the support agent in Salesforce were to update the case, this recipe handles for it because it's going to update the issue in Jira. You would see the logical operation where it's going to create the issue if it doesn't exist. You could also update the case to cross-reference it back to that Jira issue that has been created. And then we talk about enriching the Jira issue with more information. So if you want to pull in comments, and because you're going to get a load of comments, so you're going to loop through all the different comments to create comments in Jira as well as attachments. So recipes can get pretty sophisticated, and there is no limit to the number of applications that you can really connect in a single recipe. Because the whole idea of making recipes very easy is we want to abstract away the complexities of the users to understand code. Instead of understanding code, we want them to be able to we want them to be able to talk the language of the business. So that's why you see recipes are very English-like, because at the end of the day, the process that we are trying to automate is dedicated towards the business. So now there is a common language where IT and the business can really connect with. And that's really the recipe language. So it's really English-like. I guess, Rachel, Simon, how much more time? Because I know I want to give Carly, but I do have one more thing to share before we can turn it over.
We definitely have time. But I also have one question for you. Like you just mentioned, because this is it's abstracted, it's made very easy and direct for the user. Can you give us, for our more technical audience, kind of an idea of the architecture on the background that's kind of supporting this recipe?
Yeah, I guess I can talk to it briefly. So compute, obviously, we use the EC2 instance. What happens, right? What actually happens when you hit start a recipe or test a recipe is this job that gets created goes into a queue. This queue would then be processed. There is a Kubernetes container that gets spun off, or that job gets assigned to that container. And for the lifetime of that job, as it's being processed, that container would live for that lifetime. So the performance in terms of scale, users do not need to worry about that, because those are things that's already managed by Workato. So at any point in time, as mentioned, users don't have to think about all this infrastructure to manage their automations. We want them to be tied very closely to their business. So all the underlying infrastructure, the management of the containers, those are things that's operated and managed by Workato. And then,
yeah, and I would add to that too, Ryan, just in case we've got some more technical folks on the line. There's other iPaaS vendors out there, or automation vendors out there, that require like upfront compute and provisioning, where you have to kind of anticipate how much is going to process through a recipe. Or let's say Ryan ran this and there were 1 million cases he wanted to sync, right? And you would have to kind of provision for that upfront because we run on a Docker Kubernetes kind of architecture, we're auto-scaling and auto-provisioning behind the scenes. So that container that this recipe is getting thrown down into when it runs, it's giving more compute power, kind of auto-provisioning if there's lots of data flowing through the recipe, or if there's, let's just say a crazy event where a million recipes get turned on at once, we're auto-provisioning those containers, obviously, to spin up and down depending on demand. So no type of compute or provisioning or anything that you would have to think of that sometimes in traditional IT passes you do have to take into consideration.
It's a huge benefit from the user perspective. At the time, I had zero experience with cloud infrastructure, and yet I was able to easily write recipes and make them functional. So it's a big benefit.
Yeah. And I guess because of the way we are architected, there isn't really a downtime, right? Say, for example, if a system were to go down, Salesforce, because of how we are architected and the metadata that we are capturing, we have the ability to now like repeat jobs, right? So this is a good example where I was testing this job, the job failed because of, for whatever reason here. And because there is information here that's captured, I can now mitigate that error and then rerun. And that's an important concept because when it comes to the whole life cycle of automations, you need to have that ability to rerun your automations whenever error happens, being able to triage for some of these errors.
Yeah, and on the flip side too of that, what I thought was just super awesome when I joined Workato is imagine this recipe is running as well, and there's unforeseen errors that Workato can't control, and that, let's say, Salesforce is down. What is very cool about the idea of us pulling into these systems, and we do this idea of backup pulling, is we know at the point in which we've got a last successful run into these third-party applications like Salesforce. So let's say that they have a crazy outage and they're down for 24 hours and they come back up, then we can actually go and ping to that last successful runtime and gather all the data that's happened since. Obviously, that is very important when we're talking about critical business processes. When it comes to case management, order to cash, imagine being delayed because we just couldn't get the data out of the system. We're trying to guarantee data delivery in those mechanisms. And again, transparent to you as the user, because we're just asking for that data proactively behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Hey Ryan, do these recipes also have like version control and any change management features?
Yeah, Rachel, you hit home on the next topic that I wanted to cover. So I'll go through the different tabs. So we talked about the recipe, which is the whole workflow. We talked about jobs. Obviously, we spoke about connections. Now comes versions. So as you start to build up on that recipe, you may have different collaborators building on that same recipe. You may have different changes associated with the recipe. So all of these are tracked as different versions. And you can see what has changed, who has modified it. You can also add comments. And if you want to compare different versions to find the diff of these different versions of what has changed, those are things that you could do, right? So you click on this tool, you say compare, so you get to see what has changed. And it's a very visual interface, so you can really see it from the Workato tool itself.
Super cool.
Yeah. So that's for versions. Test cases is something that we also released. When was that? I think late last year. So if you think about the whole project life cycle, you have your design phase, your development phase, and then comes testing. Testing is actually a very critical part of a whole development life cycle, where you want to do ensure that your code reviews are done. You want to do UAT. You can start to build different test cases, right, to test for the logic of this entire recipe. So you could mimic jobs, you could mock up data within those test cases and run automated testing on it. And I also heard questions, hey, can I do this in GitHub where I want to automate my testing? Sure, you could do it too. Because at the end of the day, you could export this as what we call a manifest and then upload it to GitHub and then run your test cases there. So that's also possible. And then the last tab, which is settings, this gives you more advanced control over the recipes. Concurrency, I guess for the more technical users out there, by default, when you run a recipe in Workato, it's single threaded, meaning it will only move on to the next job whenever the first job has completed or the last job is completed. If I would up this concurrency to 3, it's going to assign 3 workers to this recipe, and now I can process 3 jobs at once. So that's the whole idea behind concurrency. And then these are just additional metrics where you could start to measure. We can talk about the dashboard later, but these are just other things you could do with the recipes. Data retention. This is also important for people who are more sensitive to the data. If I want to control or like the specific policy or how many days the data is going to be stored, you would configure the retention policy. Or if I don't want to store because it's PII data, you could also not store the data. And then the last part of our recipe is, earlier we talked about being able to share templates. By default, every single recipe that any customer built is all private to the customer. But for some reason, if the customer feels very generous, he wants to share with the community about this great idea, he could publish that to the community, and it's going to be available for others to download and see only the logic of the recipe, but not the data. So that's also possible by publishing the recipe. Any questions on this?
I had a couple questions, but first I got to apologize to our audience. We had a couple questions come in earlier that I should bring up.
Okay.
One that was relevant, you just mentioned templates again. So somebody was asking that you had patented some of the templates, or what was your statement earlier regarding patents?
The whole premise around being able to clone recipes, that whole concept, that's patented. Not the actual recipes, but the whole concept of being able to clone recipes.
Okay, that makes sense. Looks like we have another question that just came in. Is this all web-based? You can use it on Linux and other operating systems?
It's web-based, so you do not need to install your own IDE. Everything that you see here is just web-based. No software, hardware to install.
Excellent. Also, we had somebody earlier that was jealous of Rachel's view out her window, and I am too. Rachel's got a nice view out that window. And one other question I had, you brought up concurrency and potentially multiple workers. What's that have an impact as far as potential data duplication? What's Workato do to prevent accidental duplication?
Data duplication? So there's a couple of ways. I guess the first way, it can obviously be handled by the logic of the recipe itself. So as you build your recipes, those are typical scenarios that you want to account for. The second thing is at the source, when you initiate a trigger and you start a recipe, Workato has a cursor. Natively, we have a cursor that understands when was the last record that we pulled. So it's indexed to that specific record. And for the next concurrent, the next records that's in line, it's going to process that instead of the previous one. So the cursor handles for that data duplication.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, we call it like a, I don't know, at least in our early days, Ryan, I don't know if anyone uses this term anymore, but we talk about like a unique thumbprint of records that are coming through. So as that recipe is processing, you've got your cursor, so picking up, in sequence and trying to make sure that we're processing these events in the order in which they occurred in the third-party systems. But also when they pass through, we, in our connectors, have what we call dedupe logic. So essentially, we're going to say, what's the unique ID on that record and what timestamp did it pass through at? If we've already seen that we passed that through in job history, we will ignore it. And you'll see that kind of even in the job interface sometimes of like one event happened but didn't meet the conditions or was already processed or something like that to basically mitigate the idea of data being duplicated. And then to Ryan's point, there is some human element here too. Maybe you do want those events coming in duplicates, but the rest of the downstream logic might be able to suss that out.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I guess, Simon, if there's no questions, I wanted to leave the audience with one final thing to complete out this whole project. So let's say I have finished my entire development and my testing cycle. Now I need to be able to deploy this into my subsequent environments, my upstream environments. How can I do that? So this is where we call this the one-click deployment feature, because it's literally a couple of clicks for you to deploy it into your testing environment or your production environment. So you would come into that project. Again, everything's organized by projects. You have your assets allocated to the project. If I want to do the deployment, I just hit deploy. And these are my upstream different environments. So my test or production, if I want to send it to test for user acceptance testing, I could do that. And then I could say, hey, this is maybe version 1 of customer case management process. Hit next. It's going to understand the different assets that is associated to that project, which is the customer management project that I have. If I want to go into the final details to see what are the recipes that's associated, I could do it. You want to customize it by adding more elements to it, you could do that too. And if you hit next, assuming it's a very clean test environment that has no new, existing assets in there, it's going to tell you it will add 5 assets. But assuming you already have some of these assets that are there and you want to update the versions to it, it's going to understand that there are changes made, and it's going to tell you what changes it's going to update it with. So you can also view the details. And with one click, it's really just going to deploy it to your upstage environment. And there you go. If you were to switch into that new environment, the testing environment, now users can start to test for that workflow that we were just creating.
Excellent. That was a pretty cool demo. And I mean, I spent a year using it, and you just covered a lot of what it is to use it every day. So it's a good introduction for the rest of our audience.
Yeah. Although, Simon, it's only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Even after a year of using it, there were features that every day I was like, and the rate at which you're introducing new features, I could almost not keep up with it for a little bit. It was just, there's a better way to do this. Here it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before we move into Carly's portion of the demo, we just want to reintroduce the show real quick. For those of you who've joined us recently, this is the Howdy Partner episode for this week, and we're hosting Workato here and demonstrating. This is currently the enterprise platform, and then I think we're going to see the embedded platform coming up next. And as always, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. We'll try to get them answered and make this as interactive as possible. Is there anything else that you wanted to show us, Ryan, or should we pass it off to Carly?
No, I'll let Carly chime in, and then if there's anything, I can connect after.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, then I will switch this over. I think can I bump you off, Ryan? All right, cool. Right. So I'm going to walk us through what we call our embedded platform. But as I go through this, you're going to say, that kind of looks familiar. And it should, because everything that Ryan was showing you from a fundamental aspect, recipes, connectors, how to build, how to test, how to deploy, really kind of those fundamental aspects of integrations, they are all part of the same core offering as our embedded platform. So you might be looking at this and be like, this doesn't look any different. That's because it's not. It's the exact same web-hosted app.workato.com platform that you're seeing. Simply when it comes to the embedded offering, we're just adding in a couple more pieces of functionality that we'll get into in a demo today. Just to reiterate, what does embedded really mean to us? For those who are familiar with OEM type of software, essentially we are taking this platform that you're seeing right here, and we are allowing our partners who purchase Workato as an embedded solution to deliver this to their end customers. And really the way that works is kind of twofold. Offering a multi-tenanted solution, so the ability to create customers at will, at random, and put all of your customers essentially into the platform. Those become their own secure Workato tenants, which we'll take a look at. So that's one aspect of it, essentially owning the software to say, hey, I've got 100 customers I need to bring on board that are going to use this integration service. Let's assume in this case, I'm Acme. We love to use Acme as our example customer. So Acme has a software and they want people to connect their customers between Acme and the applications that they live in every day. And so we do this through offering this type of admin console to create all of these customer accounts. And the accounts then behave as everything you've already seen in Ryan's world that he demoed. So recipes and connections and all the other tools that are out there. That's one big aspect of the embedded platform. The other is the fact that, per its name, it can be embedded into product. So what I mean by that is we have a series of iframes and APIs that developers can use to essentially tap into this solution and bring that into in product, in your front end, however you would want to surface it up to your end customers to give them access into that tenant. So it's a natural look and feel of, hey, I'm inside of Acme software and I can also go build a recipe. The value there obviously is Acme doesn't need to go build its own workflow product or integration offering. It can really just kind of tap into our services by embedding Workato into their own solution. So just to reiterate, same product, we're just adding additional features, and we'll get into a couple of these tools, which you started to allude to a little bit, but Ryan did really just kind of give an overview of tip of the iceberg type of functionality. Recipes are our core way of getting workflows created and built and running. But as you could potentially see from this list, there's tons of other types of functionality inside of the product to do things like build your own connector, which we'll talk about, potentially store some key value pairs, have static data storage within Workato, either through what we call a lookup table or AWS plug using what we call Workato files, which is S3 buckets behind the scenes. So lots of different things, sophisticated logic like PubSub when you need to do high event processing. Ryan kind of alluded to the fact that we have an entire API platform offering. So I share all these things because to the persona that uses Workato, it could be as simple as that two-step recipe that Ryan created, which is a trigger happening in Salesforce and then one action happening in Jira. When we look at our most kind of sophisticated technical customers, they're doing things like writing in our Ruby, JavaScript, and Python connectors, building their own connectors, using AWS Lambdas, kind of going nuts on the platform, if you will, using all these different tools that facilitate it, because at the end of the day, we make integrations a bit easier. They're still hard inherently. So we've got lots of tools to help you solve all of the kind of span of integration use cases from simple to complex. So just to touch on that. So back to what does it really mean to be within this embedded workspace? Again, nothing really kind of crazy here, but you might see a couple things. Acme ERP has now branded this. We've kind of changed up some colors. Everything else from a tooling perspective is the same, except for this new Managed Customers tab that is now part of this account. So really, who operates inside of this? If Acme is our embedded partner, this is Acme members. So they might be part of the professional services team of Acme, maybe their product and engineering. They're essentially people who are managing this integration strategy. And they will, at will, kind of make customer accounts, set these guys up. Maybe they've got different customers that are coming on board. They might put them into different plans to track different levels of usage in our platform. And this is kind of a really easy way to just go provision a new tenant in Workato for that customer. What I'll say that's important about the embedded platform here is all of this type of administrative experience can also be driven via API. So a lot of our customers will come in and say, hey, I've got to put 200 of my customers on this platform. I don't want to manually go create all of them. Great. Go run a script and create all 200 of those via API. And we provision those tenants for them behind the scenes, and they're good to go. So these are kind of some of the different customers that have been created just for the purposes of a demo. Where we're going to focus our time today is on this one specific example. We also tend to use PyPiper a lot for those who like Silicon Valley. So PyPiper would be a customer of Acme's here. And they are essentially using integrations between Acme and whatever systems they want. So this is just a high-level dashboard to give Acme a kind of representation of what type of information or type of usage they're acquiring, what their activity has been over time. So if I see a dip in usage, we can go investigate the types of apps that or connectors that they have been able to connect to, who has access into that account from both like a management perspective as well as someone who might be accessing it directly, and just a bunch of different other ways to configure that specific account. Maybe just thinking about from a kind of user perspective, we don't want this Pied Piper customer to see all of the connectors that are available to them straight out of the box, but we're actually withholding them to only see Salesforce and Jira, for example. So there's a lot of granularity here in controlling what the user can see and how they can behave. And we might only give them a couple connectors so that when they go and build recipes, they might only see a couple. So you can start to really control that user experience. Really important in our world, because you might be working with end customers who are not as technical in nature. So you don't want to necessarily overwhelm them with a lot of things or a lot of choices. So lots of cool ways to kind of set up, that account for that customer to be successful. And then as a partner, you can also do very cool things like brand your account so that it has all of your colors and your schemes and all that kind of cool stuff. So a bit of a slick UI here to start to really make it look and feel as if it is part of the partner who's purchasing our embedded platform's product suite. It will kind of feel like Acme Integrate or Acme Connect or whatever they try to brand this to. And this is all kind of accessible through our platform as well as through APIs that we offer. So those are just some features that we'll talk about. What I'm going to do, though, is switch us over and take a look at one of these customers specifically. And then I've got a different application that we're going to jump into that provides the experience as if I was that customer in the embedded platform inside of Acme. So if we look at Pied Piper as the customer of choice here, I'm just going to switch into their account. This is where, their different assets live. From a security perspective, this is its own tenant. So all of Pied Piper's own connections to their applications and recipes all live securely in this tenant. So there's no potential to cross any data between different customers, which is obviously pretty critical in this world. But what I'll bring up to kind of tie a knot on something is here we've got some recipes. I'm going to come back to this screen in a second to show you that when we jump into the end user experience, you're going to see that these recipes actually turned on behind the scenes and that we were able to kind of link between a user experience in an embedded application as to this specific tenant here. So just kind of remember that we didn't have these recipes that are sitting here turned on. They will be in a second. So I'm going to switch my tab over to, nope, that's not right, to this tab. And we're going to kind of switch the narrative a bit. So what just happened? I'm in a new application here for Acme ERP. So Acme is the customer of Workato. They've bought our embedded platform. And this would be essentially an idea of their sample application, right? Let's say that they are an ERP of sorts. You're just seeing some static images that might be relevant to ERPs. And I'm logged into their application as Pied Piper. So again, that customer that I was just showing you. The reason that the embedded platform is super powerful is it starts to really kind of accelerate how you could offer integrations to your customers. So let's now walk down this journey. If I'm Pied Piper, I'm coming in and I own Acme ERP, I might be in finance, and I just kind of need to set up some different integrations between this ERP that runs my business as well as the other applications I'm very familiar with. We typically see that customers come into what we would consider a marketplace. Now, this isn't necessarily Workato here, but it is using APIs to kind of talk to our connectors and render this page, if you will. Where you'll really start to see Workato is if I were to say, hey, we actually hold a lot of our information in Salesforce. We need to connect to that. We'll jump into a page, something similar to this. Acme probably has built this page as well, but put yourself in Pied Piper's shoes. If I'm in this application, I'm using it as my ERP, and I want to connect it to my Salesforce account. First and foremost, I need to connect. So what you're seeing here is your first look at what we consider as a Workato embedded iframe. Kind of hovering over it right now with my cursor, which is basically our way to give these engineers who live inside of their own applications really easy ways to do things like embed an iframe into their front end and allow a user to set up credentials. And then what happens here is the user can go and connect. We've already connected, but they would be able to go through this flow. And this connection then just goes and gets placed into Pied Piper's account inside of Workato. Really seamless experience, because what we don't want to do is have to go tell a developer to go, research Salesforce and figure out how their OAuth flow works and get that coded into their app. Why don't you just drop our iframe in? And then we manage authentication. We manage keeping that connection up live and running, refreshing it over time. So this is really kind of the first look at how we can take parts of the Workato platform that you've seen in different facets already through our demos and drop them already into your product through secure JWT linking of these iframes. So that's one aspect of Workato that you can start to see. And you can drop any single page of the Workato platform into an iframe. So that was just kind of a small little widget, but let's imagine that you wanted someone to kind of build a recipe. You can do that as well. Any single page in the Workato platform for a specific customer can show into an iframe as well. Let's say though, for example, I just want the customer to come in, connect, and we already have a sync that was set up. So imagine the kind of recipe that Ryan had put together between Salesforce cases and Jira, tickets. Maybe that is already living in my account. All I needed to do was connect to my systems, and all I do is press start. And that now kind of starts up the workflow here. And then if I switch over back to that page that I told you guys to remember we had seen and share back this tab, what you're going to see is that recipe now is active and running. So all it was the click of a button to a user, and behind the scenes, all of this cool automation logic is running for them, and that recipe has turned on and is ready to go. So that's where we start to see a lot of this kind of bridge between our core product. You've seen the recipes, you've seen the plumbing, and then oftentimes how our embedded partners will take that product to market, knowing that maybe their customers shouldn't go and build a recipe themselves, but they could click some buttons and be done with it. It's really an accelerated tool to kind of offer these integrations over to our customers. And not only that, if they wanted to go and, I didn't mean to stop presenting. If they wanted to go even further and say, I don't want to just let them see this. I want them to go and kind of see a whole recipe builder. To the point I made earlier, they could actually go and embed our full recipe builder, and this should look familiar because you've seen this from Ryan's demo. This is just our recipe builder dropped directly into an iframe inside of somebody else's application. And what that does is it obviously helps the user not think about, well, what's Workato? Why am I here? I'm still living inside of Acme ERP. I'm just now getting a looking lens into building, if you will, and I can go ahead and start building, do this exact same type of things that Ryan went through in his demo, just inside of another application.
Carly, what are you seeing in general? Are a lot of your embedded customers bringing in and making accessible the entire Workato platform, or just small pieces to target parts of their customer base?
I'd say for the most part, it's falling a little bit into the latter in that there's some hesitation at first. It's more of a fear of unknown to throw customers into this, because it's not, when you think about embedding our product, you're probably exponentially increasing exposure, right? It's not just that you're going to go turn this on probably for one person, but when someone makes a product decision to go and embed this builder, they likely are making it accessible to maybe a small cohort, but still a lot of people that they'll have to manage. And when you take on an OEM software, if anyone's purchased one before, you typically are on the hook to support that once you put it into your product. So I think more from a business justification perspective, people get a little bit concerned, but we have some customers who don't want to do any type of their own type of development, and they're like, throw this at anyone, they'll figure it out, you know? So I think it does take a little bit to understand your persona of your product, who your end user is. Do you anticipate them being able to grapple with this experience, or do you anticipate them really resonating much more with something that looks, if I hop quickly back into Salesforce, like this, where I'm just clicking a couple things and I'm on my way? And that's why we offer both. But where we have seen people embedded, I think they know that they're targeting a persona that understands business logic, you know, or might have some experience doing that type of configuration themselves.
That makes sense.
Hey, Carly, I got a quick question for you.
Yep.
How does Workato ensure that they're following data security and privacy best practices for these embedded integrations?
Absolutely. So not to get too techie on you all, but I guess I will. So at the core foundation, are you able to see my console? It doesn't look like it pulls up when I share my screen here. That's okay. I don't need to share it, but I'm inspecting this element, and I was going to show you exactly how the iframe token is rendered. So the security of that is of utmost importance, right? If I'm creating a connection here, the security of that is that I need to make sure that that puts the connection in the right place, right? I don't want this connection that Pied Piper is going to make to show up in somebody else's account. So that is linked all behind the scenes through a JSON web token. So everything that we do kind of on the iframe perspective is very secure in terms of creating a token that speaks to a specific account. We do kind of sign it with different keys, so we're very kind of secure in our exchange of information. And that is how we make sure that the multi-tenancy structure stays in place when we're doing these embedded iframes. Generally speaking, just from a data security perspective, that's why kind of when I was showing the demo in the very beginning and showing all those different customer lists, they all have their own separate account. The idea of being truly multi-tenanted that way was a very kind of conscious decision that other iPaaS vendors have not made, in terms of they might pull all credentials into one place and then just have them point to different workflows and things like that. We do not, at the end of the day, want any connections to be swapped out by accident or anything like that. And that's why everything sits in its own secure tenant. Because at the end of the day, you know, you would not want to send customer A's Salesforce data into customer B's Jira instance. And that's why we keep things multi-tenanted with their own data retention policies. And we have a full kind of role-based access control systems to say who should be accessing what within those tenants.
Got it.
Awesome. Let me switch back to this tab. So the other tool that I wanted to kind of touch on here, so we kind of really talked through how everything's set up, then maybe how someone might experience that from an embedded perspective. Behind the scenes, there's one tool we kind of talked about a little bit earlier that I did want to also touch on, which comes to creating additional connectivity options. And why is this important? When Acme ERP comes to us and say, hey, we want to embed your software, they're solving integrations between Acme ERP and their customers' systems. The chances that we have Acme ERP as a connector may or may not be, high, depending on what type of software. We sell to softwares across the spectrum between SMB to mid-market to enterprise. So the idea that we might have every single connector out there for both their application and what their customers are asking for is a gamble sometimes. So we've got all those connectors that kind of Ryan talked about. We have this ability to go pull some things from our community. But at the end of the day, our most, I'd say, technical users, in a sense, need to also be able to say, I can go connect to anything in a pretty reusable way. Ryan had talked about universal connectivity, things like an HTTP connector, database connectors. But if I am Acme, I want to see my Acme connector, right, inside of those recipes to really establish the credibility of this offering. And how do you achieve that is through the idea of our connector SDK. So if I go and build this, I can build off of an open API spec, but let's just say we want to build totally from scratch, and we'll just call it our AWS Howdy Partner Connector. But the idea at this point in time is you're probably getting a look now at probably our most code-centric tool, if you will, inside of the platform, which is this idea of building out connectors on a Ruby framework. So we're a Ruby shop kind of at heart, and this is using Ruby, but quite frankly, if you have any type of object-oriented language like JavaScript, Python, or others, very easy to get yourself familiar because it's a framework. But it's a very cool way to start to do things like build triggers and actions. So you've seen kind of this interface before, getting triggers, setting up actions. It all correlates off of this type of code block. There's a lot of sample code in here to help you kind of get started. That's really just defining what all of these things should look like. It's a very kind of responsive UI. So if I changed connection name up here, or I'm sorry, API key up here to be API token, and I wanted to go ahead and save that, I'll see it reflect over here as I start to develop. And then I can start to really figure out how to test my authentication flow, how to test different triggers and actions that could work against webhooks or poll. It's a very cool way to develop, iterate, and work on net new connectors. And the underlying logic of this all is what we use to build our connectors in-house on our product team as well. Same with everything else in the world that you get full version control. You could share it also to our community. But this is, just kind of nerding out a little bit, my favorite tool in the whole platform, because the kind of opportunities are limitless to make your connector experience really, really, really sharp from a builder experience. You get to define what your input fields are to the actions, your output fields. You can make them all metadata driven. They can be really dynamic in nature. It's a very, very cool tool to use. And for some of our more tech-oriented folks down there, there's a corresponding kind of SDK, what we call our SDK gem, which lets you kind of locally develop this as well, and run some scripts on it. So very cool tool that is probably used most heavily in our embedded world because people are constantly building connectors out to what their customers are asking them for, right? They're going to keep selling this offering, and the next customer is going to come, hey, do you connect to accounting software XYZ that we've never heard of before? They can go build it right away themselves as long as they've got access to those APIs. And it becomes a complete unblocker to really get more connectivity out the door. And you'll see what is cool about all of this as well is if we go into our community library, lots of connectors out there already that people can start to pick up and learn from, and really be able to kind of take a look at that same source code, understand how things were created, potentially get a leg up install and make this their own. So all very cool features out there to extend connectivity as well.
Actually, Carly, one thing to call out is the whole recipe design experience can be so seamless earlier is because of all the magic that is happening in this source code.
Exactly.
Right. So yeah.
Yeah. So if we kind of take even a look at, actually, let me go into a different sync here. If I really wanted to go deeper into first name, last name, email, and maybe let's say I wanted to add another field here that had a pick list that was dynamic or something like that, right? Where I could just give you certain values that are based off of an API that kind of turns, that is reaching into your system and returning the data that is part of your Acme schema. That can all be defined in the SDK so that we know, hey, the next field that you're going to go and look at is actually pulling directly from that system. so that when the user goes and looks at it, they don't have to go look into that system. So if you recall back from Ryan's demo, you could kind of look and see drop downs of like, what are your projects in Jira that you want to sync it to? That's the connector doing the hard work behind the scenes to go get all of your projects and show them to you really easy in the UI. And then the user can just say, that's awesome. These are my projects. I don't need to remember which one is my project by going into Jira. We're doing all of that magic in the SDK, and all of that magic is accessible to you as a builder as well. So just a very cool tool to really like provide a delightful experience to the builder of a recipe. Awesome. All right, I'm going to switch us back into the administrative account here. So essentially, we were operating within Pied Piper as one of our customers. We're going to come back to kind of tie a loop on all of this, which is the management aspect. So all those customers that Acme is managing. I'll also share a feature here that I think is pretty cool, which is when you do go and build in that SDK and you do go and build out connectors, we have the ability to go share out those connectors within your embedded ecosystem. So essentially to all your customers. So something like Acme ERP, which they've been able to build, I could go and I can share different versions out to all my customer base. And what's really cool about this is it helps with kind of agile development of the connector. So let's say that I had a new version called version 14 that I was making. I wanted to push it out to all my customers. As soon as I hit shared connectors, the transparent update. So another way that I think we're doing a lot of really cool transparent management of the software is if I go and I push out a new version of this connector to all my customers, simply that code is just going to run on the next job of a recipe. So no downtime in that scenario to be able to make these changes, create new updates to connectors. Recipes just continue to work. I know it feels like voodoo, it feels like magic. Believe us when we say it. And they just kind of keep picking up on these newest versions to just keep operating and working, which makes management of these things, the agile development of them, very easy as well. And then the last feature that I'll kind of touch on here is just a little bit around our role-based access control. So every workspace, when you think about whether you're in the direct platform or the embedded platform, it's really important to understand who gets access to what. There are tons of tools you've seen today. There's tons of probably kind of business critical operations that are running against these recipes. The thing that is really important is that you are able to, as an owner of the system, give out access at the right sets of permissions. So we do have the ability to go set roles at a very granular, way. So let's say that, I wanted Ryan to come in and invite him into Acme Integrates Workspace, and I want him to be able to probably view and edit recipes. He could probably take a look at the job history and test and start them, but I do not want him creating anything that new or, definitely not deleting things that I've worked hard to go and create. So I can start to do some pretty granular kind of role-based access control across different applications. Different types of features that we have across different platform tools, which are all over here in this menu, to really give him that granularity to come in and do the right things and make sure he doesn't do the wrong things. So we do have that, a very kind of granular view of it. And then as you go and you invite people in, you obviously can start to invite them against these different types of roles, anything that you've created as additional roles, and then they get invited into the single tenanted workspace with said roles and permissions. Same goes for our embedded customers. So they have the ability to also do something similar. But the cool thing about this one is, let's say that I want to tell Ken that he can be an admin, but he can only access certain customers here, but not all of them for our embedded accounts as well. So lots of granularity that we've thought through, lots of things to think about when it comes to access points. And again, as a tenant of the embedded platform, we really focus on all of these things also being able to be driven via API. So we've got APIs to kind of manage all of this as well, which is a cool addition to the product in case people don't want to live in this interface. Any questions on any of this?
A couple of things I was thinking of when you were talking. The CDK, are you seeing any customers that are building custom connectors for their third-party software just because Workato has this established user base and they want to become more accessible?
Yes, great question. So we actually also have, so there's a couple different approaches to our embedded partners building out connectivity. Some of them will come in and say, I'm going to build out these connectors and keep them totally private. It's a competitive advantage. My customers are asking for accounting software XYZ. I don't want any of my competitors to know that I have it. So I'm going to build it on Workato, share it out with my customers only. Others will come and say, hey, I'm Acme. This is great that you're letting me build this connector. I want the whole world to know that my connector is out here. I want to, be able to make it accessible to everyone. So today, what that looks like is the ability to go share it out to our community. We also, though, have the ability, I'll just show you this from a recipe perspective, to have something called a partner connector, which essentially is a way of, so when you publish into our community, everyone can see your source code. So sometimes partners are a little bit hesitant of that because, they don't necessarily want someone to take it down and then modify it, right? So for our partners, and this could be an embedded partner or one of our direct partners, it kind of is whoever is part of our partner network, has the ability to also submit connectors into what we consider this partner framework, which is essentially just, they still own the connector code. We are just able to push it into our catalog without source code being shown. It's kind of so you now kind of have different options. Do you want to take more of an open source route and get your connector out there? Or do you kind of want to just own it and have it be listed as like a regular connector here? So different options. At the end of the day, our whole entire intent of the Workato offering is to continue to increase connectivity options. That's going to keep being a driver of our platform, right? So we're trying to figure out as many ways as we can make that possible.
So for those open source community connectors, the community is kind of validating them because they can see the source code. That makes a lot of sense. For the partner connectors, is Workato validating, or is it purely on that partner to make sure that it's accurate and functional?
Yep. It goes through kind of a private GitHub review. They'll submit their code into us. Our team will QA it and run its own tests and kind of go through all of that. So it has a little bit more scrutiny than publishing to our community, because that one's pretty much kind of, we smoke test that code to make sure that there's nothing malicious in it, but it's going up to the community probably regardless, right? Well, unless there's malicious activity, but then on the partner side, it goes into a GitHub process. We do a full kind of PR code review of it, and it goes through our whole QA system and unit test before it gets published into the code, because the partner connector route is a true production push, whereas the community is much more of a takedown from an open source type of model.
Okay, that makes sense. The other thing I was wondering is that you have these two separate kind of setups here. You have enterprise and you have embedded. What's the lowest level entry point? I'm a small business. I have like one thing I want to automate. How do I get in? Do I actually join through your enterprise? Do I find one of your embedded partners? How do I get into it?
I can talk to that. So what you saw earlier, it's usually typically how an enterprise would function, where you have many different units, business units. For a smaller customer, typically they would not have as many departments. So they will start off with a singular workspace. So for example, what Carly is sharing here is just a single workspace where you could subdivide it into functional units. And then from there, you build your recipes, you set your permissions based on the project. So you typically start with a single workspace, and then you grow from there.
Okay. So still technically the enterprise platform is just going to be suited more for a smaller business.
Correct. And then the different capabilities, some of it are add-ons. So you probably don't want to give all the enterprise capabilities to a customer that may not need it. So then you would just give them the basic workspace with kind of the recipe.
Okay. So then say this small business grows, and hopefully that's the case. how easy is it to then expand into the full range of the enterprise capabilities?
Those are just add-ons. So at the end of the day, what we were showing, all the different capabilities, those can be added into the workspace. So say if the customer were to grow to have many different business units, then we will enable the feature called Automation HQ to be able to grant them the access to manage different workspaces, and then more workspaces to govern. So yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. One thing maybe I missed or I didn't ask yet. As far as embedded goes, I know that on the enterprise space, there's these pre-built recipes basically for kind of obvious solutions. Is there something similar on embedded? So if we have is there a number of pre-built solutions or at least best practice that we can start from?
Yeah, so I think the answer is very similar for both. So you're both going to look to the community and look at recipes that are curated there. That's basically the best way to kind of take a look at things that are curated for your use cases. What I'll say about embedded, the caveat there is it's going to be really hard to find a template that works for you because none of them probably have your app. Right. So you'll probably find templates in the community that do things like sync Salesforce to Jira, but I actually want it to be Salesforce to Acme. Still doing an account sync, for example, but I need to switch Jira for Acme now. So our embedded partners will heavily utilize the community, but then make almost like their private community version, which is a feature we didn't really get to kind of discuss today. But a lot of our embedded partners will use templates from the community to start, make them their own for their own applications, and then they will publish them to the community that only their customers can see. So a privatized community, if you will. So they're almost kind of curating their own off of templates that do exist. But the kind of snafu there, if you will, is that when you pull something down from the community as an embedded partner, it needs to include your app. It's not likely that your app is out there unless you're one of the kind of top SaaS applications that we already have a connector for, which you might be, right? But if you're a newer software that just hit the market or something like that, you have a little bit of work to do to make your own templates.
Okay. And just to reach out to our audience again, we've seen some pretty cool demonstrations. If we have any questions about what they've shown us so far, what you'd like to see them or answer for us, go ahead and drop those in the chat and we'll bring them up. I guess one of the last questions I have for you is, what's the future of Workato? Where are we headed next? What can we expect soon?
Then maybe that is something that I can share.
Sure.
With my screen, that's a good segue because we know now AI is a very hot topic. So Workato, we have drank the Kool-Aid. We have also embedded some of these AI offerings into Workato. I'm going to expand my screen. Do you still see the Workato screen?
Yes, we see tabs on top as well.
Okay. So earlier, when I was demonstrating the platform, we talked about the builder experience. Kali also showed a teaser of the embedded side of things. Now with AI being such a very hot topic, how can we use AI to create value? And in the integration world, to make integration a lot simpler, a lot easier to understand. So what I'll be showing you is, and I think many of you might have heard the word co-pilots being used in many different products. So Workato, we have our own version of co-pilots that exist in the form of recipes as well as connectors. So I'll be creating a recipe, but now what you'll be seeing that's very different. And Simon, you talk about the future of Workato. Potentially, this could be one future of Workato. It's still uncertain until we see more adoption, but let's see. So I'm going to hit start building. It brings you through the recipe wizard, but now with an added element of a chat window. So imagine now you are chatting with an actual user describing your requirements to the team that's trying to automate it. So typically when you start a project, you'll gather all the requirements. You may have a requirement documentation. Now it's as simple as keying in that requirement documentation into this Copilot, and it's going to describe and build the workflow for you. So in that same example, when I was starting, we talked about creating or updating, I think, Jira issue when new or updated Salesforce case is open. So let's see what this brings up. And then now it's going to understand the context, right? It's going to understand the objects, which is the issues. It's going to understand the applications, which is Jira and Salesforce. And then it's going to churn out the kind of like the requirements in this form. And then same thing earlier, right? Same thing that we did when it comes to developing recipes, we connect the systems. So here, very, very similar. I'm going to connect to the systems that I'm already connected to. And what it's going to do, it's based on the requirements that you have fed it with and the connections that now you're connected to. On the left-hand side, very shortly, you're going to see the actual recipe being surfaced by the Copilot. And then same thing, if you translate it to the SDK Copilot, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to generate code. Now you can copy that code and then paste it into the actual connector, so it actually develops it for you.
Can you give us an idea of how this is happening on the back end while we're waiting for it to populate? So, as far as the architecture involved, can you give us an idea of how this is actually working?
I guess I can give a brief idea of how it works. So at the end of the day, there is a large language model, right, that we have trained. We train it with many different recipes. All of these things, right? All of these keywords, these are embeddings, right? These are embeddings that it understands. So it's going to take that embeddings and then reference it to our LLMs. And then based on that, churn out the most accurate representation of the recipe in this form on the left. So what you see here,
awesome.
I'm actually pretty shocked that it gave like a pretty long and descriptive recipe, but yeah, there you go, right? So it's gonna give you that recipe template, but more importantly is we don't want to take AI's word for it. We want to make sure that there is a proper review process, just like leveraging with any AI tools. You want to be able to review the work. So it's gonna provide you approval steps. So same thing, you're gonna go through this step where you're gonna approve it or reject it, if any. And then let's say it's approved. You can really use this recipe. And the cool thing is you will notice it's also doing the data mapping for you, right? So not only is it building the recipe logic, it's also mapping the data where it thinks it's the most relevant based on the IQ that we spoke about earlier. So all of these things really lessens the development time. Right, but then more checks and balances have to be done to ensure that the work is being done the right way.
Yeah, so, for anyone who's entered into the world of AI, which I think most of us have at this point, this is done in partnership with OpenAI's APIs. So what is interesting, just behind the scenes of the book, is we had to wait a while for this recipe to populate. That's because we're still learning from the model that we've created, and it because of the way AI works, it's just going to train itself more and more over time. So we're going to see it become more and more performant. So if anyone's out there exploring the world of AI, it's super interesting because you kind of have to accept that it might be a little bit of a slow burn in the beginning as it's trying to train itself. And we're feeding it our community recipes, so it kind of learns as it goes. But it's just been such a really cool thing to watch. We had our user conference a couple of weeks ago, and we showed this at our keynote, and our head of product made a comment because it was taking a while, he's like, a lot of people might be trying to write essays right now on OpenAI because people were probably hounding the API there, which is why it was delayed on our end. So it's just it's a super interesting space right now, but the potential of what this could spit out for a builder is obviously massive. So it's really exciting for us.
Yeah.
And is this publicly available at this point? Internal only? Can anybody play with this? What's its status?
Yeah, so right now it's internal only. I think once we get to a state where the model doesn't hallucinate as much and it's more accurate, then we'll be in a state to release it. But it should be coming up very shortly.
Well, I'm glad you were able to share some with us today. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, there is, we won't have it teed up to demo today, but the same type of functionality lives in that SDK tool that I showed you.
Yeah.
So feeding it just literally like a link to an API document website and it can go and it can scrape that APIs and turn it into connector on the Workato platform, which is just as impressive when you kind of go through that as well. So cool things that we're able to do with this OpenAI partnership in our in-house LLM.
Yeah, that's excellent. I know that we are approaching towards the end of our episode here. Rachel, do you have any final thoughts or questions that you'd like to provide to our guests before we thank them for their time?
I don't have any questions, but if Ryan and Carly want to say anything before we end the show, now would be a good time.
No, I think I will start off. I guess I'll end off with what I started. Is at the end of the day, we are really trying to solve that integration problem. So all these capabilities, these enhancements that Simon you talked about, right? The future of Workato with AI, it all addresses that point that we are trying to solve, which is being able to democratize integrations to make it easier to develop. You don't need a technical skill set. We empower the business users to be able to develop some of these things. And if you look back in the traditional world, you need to have coding experience, you need to know infrastructure, you need to know how the underlying mechanisms of the API works. But I mean, with Workato, with the future of AI, it's going to lessen development time. But it doesn't mean that you do not need developers, you do not need partners. I think these people becomes even more critical just because you need to know code before you copy code. Otherwise, you are copying redundancies into your code. So it's just going to make the approvals, the governance a lot more stringent now with development becoming much more easier. So that's really what I had. But Carly, anything on your side?
I'll just echo. I think it's a very exciting time for us here at Workato to see the worlds of automation and AI kind of blend. But I think what's been wonderful for me to witness, at least, especially being in a technical world and living in the product every day, is it's just a really, really great product to use. So I encourage anyone out there who might be listening, if you are stuck on integrations or automations, it is just it's a really, really slick product, and it's reliable. As someone who has an engineering background and has coded before, it's just a really, really slick, nice product. So we definitely encourage anyone who's interested to get their hands on and try it, as we've linked down there. It is it's a great tool. So hope you guys walk away with that as well.
And I do want to invite our audience, as we have a link down here, if you want to learn more about Workato and how they might be able to improve your offerings or solve some of your problems, definitely go ahead and check out this free trial. If there are any last minute questions from the audience, we can try to answer them. But otherwise, I'd like to thank both Ryan and Carly for their time, and Workato in general for coming and demonstrating their products with us today and helping us learn a little more about automation and integration. And we just really appreciate the time.
No, appreciate it, Simon and Rachel and AWS.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the partnership.
And I'm going to quickly drop Ryan and Carly's LinkedIn contacts in the chat. So if you want to reach out to them as well, you have that opportunity. And I'll be available here shortly. Here we go. Thank you all again. And next week's episode will be coming up on Wednesday. And we will be hosting QC Where. So join us again next week, same time, same place. And thank you again, Ryan and Carly.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.